Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So today we're keeping things pretty normal. We're taking a look at cards trending on the market because of their play in the meta, either right now or in the near future. Now we don't have too much happening as we approach the end of the year. Phantom Revenge is honestly one of the most underwhelming side sets we've had in quite a while, and after the remote duel YCS, there's nothing really happening until the 300th YCS in February next year. But of course, as things come up, I'll still be bringing them to your attention so that hopefully you can look to make moves at your locals and regionals, especially during what is typically a pretty quiet time in the Yu-Gi-Oh market. Let's get started. Kicking things off, let's talk a little bit about Vanquish Soul Jaolong. So Jaolong is of course an important monster in the Vanquish Soul strategy. Fire is a very important attribute to have in your hand so that you can use your other Vanquish Soul card effects, but this card can also reveal 2 fires in your hand to allow you to search for any Vanquish Soul card. At the same time, this is a level 5 body that's really easy to bring out onto the field, so you can turn it into rock or use it with the K9 cards to make an Xyz play. Anyways, Vanquish Soul is actually starting to see a little bit of a resurgence in play. This was one of the strongest decks in the game back when Justice Hunters first came out, but everyone sort of wrote it off when both Stake Your Soul and Raisin were limited unexpectedly, and to be fair, we didn't see much competitive success from the strategy for a little while there. However, the deck has actually been getting a lot of attention over the last month or so, and it actually resulted in the deck winning YCS Bologna this past weekend. I do believe that in online play, I've seen some players running Vanquish Soul Dracotail as well, though I'm not sure exactly how real that deck is. Now, in terms of market movement, this is a card that was quite expensive when the deck was really popular because Jaolong just had the one printing that came out back in Age of Overlord, but for whatever reason was not reprinted in the tins from that year. So for a while, we were seeing Jaolong up at anywhere from $15 to $20 per copy, but after the unexpected hit on the ban list, it quickly fell all the way down to $2 to $3. However, over the last couple of weeks, demand for the card has skyrocketed, causing it to bump back up to right around the $10 mark. With Jaolong, obviously how well it does will depend on the performance of Vanquish Soul K9. We've seen it do well in Europe, but those results haven't really translated at the North American events in Pittsburgh and Anaheim, so it's not clear how well the deck will actually perform at the remote duel YCS or the 300th. However, I have to assume that given the popularity of Vanquish Soul, the card absolutely should be reprinted sometime in the next few months, maybe even randomly inserted into something like next year's Maze set. That said, this isn't something that I'd be holding on to too many copies of. Keep a set for yourself to go with the rest of your Vanquish Soul core, but definitely look to move your extra copies before a reprint tanks their value. Up next, we have Dracotail Arthalion. So if you've been playing meta recently, you are familiar with this card. This is essentially what makes the Dracotail deck, since on Fusion Summon you can add any number of monsters from your graveyard back to hand, up to the number of monsters you use from hand to make this card as fusion material. So in Dracotail, of course, this is definitely a 3 of, since you essentially want to make this every single turn. Now for a while there, even though Justice Hunters is an extremely meta relevant set, a bunch of cards from the set did tank in price. It's almost like when every single ultra rare in the set is good, all of them are going to fall in price together. Now initially, Dracotail was actually quite a big step back behind Yummy and K9 in terms of top cut representation. However, with the release of the branded structure deck and the help of the new ban list, we've actually seen branded Dracotail take over as clearly one of the 2 best decks in the current format. Because of this, there's been a clear uptick in demand for copies of Arthalion, since everyone playing the deck will definitely want to be running 3 copies. As a result, ultra rare copies of Arthalion have jumped up in price, coming in at $5 before, but they're now more than double that at $12 each. However, this is a really strange price point for it to hit because the collector's rares, which we saw at $12 before, are only $15 each now, and honestly, I definitely paid the extra $3 for a copy that is so much harder to pull. Beyond that, the Starlight rares haven't really moved. They're still around $28 to $30 per copy, which isn't that bad. Honestly, it's also not a bad pickup if you don't already own the card, since it is going to do a much better job of retaining its value in the long run. I think Justice Hunter stuff is still new enough that it shouldn't be reprinted anytime in the near future, unless Konami decides it's so relevant that they just want to reprint all of it ridiculously early. But given the prices of the rarities that are currently available, definitely look to offload your extra ultras and maybe even consider upgrading rarities while the gap between prices is so small. Moving on, let's take a quick look at Radiant Typhoon Swen. So this card is part of the theme that's based around Mystical Space Typhoon, and it's certainly a fun one. Swen is a really good card for the deck, since you can special summon it from hand basically for free, and it searches for any Radiant Typhoon card on normal or special summon. So of course, in pure Radiant Typhoon, this is a really good card. Over in Genesis format, Radiant Typhoon is actually a top tier deck. In modern format, we are going to be getting a couple of new Radiant Typhoon cards coming in Burst Protocol, which look really solid. However, at the moment, we're actually seeing Swen used as a small engine in the Malice deck. Swen is used alongside Eldam to give you 2 level 3 monsters on the field without burning your normal summon, and since they are both level 3, you can use them to make Cherubini and dump Dormouse into the graveyard. From there, you can use Bestials to banish your Malice monster, summon it back to the field, and then use Cherubini and the Malice monster to make your Malice Link 3. Definitely a really specific combo, but apparently this is something that has been seeing a bit of play over the last little while, and it actually made its way into the top 16 at YCS Bologna. Anyways, the Radiant Typhoon cards are all really new, just coming out in Doom of Dimensions. Swen was always clearly a good card, so it was a $3 to $4 Ultra despite not really seeing any play, but with the play it's seeing in Malice now, as well as the support coming for the Archetype in Burst Protocol, we've actually seen the Ultras jump up to $7 to $8 each, and then with the Starlight Rares, those are up too, going from $35 before to now settling anywhere in that $50 to $60 range. With this one, it's typically something we'd be looking to move as soon as we see that it has this niche hype, and I don't really know how real Malice is going to be as a deck moving forward. However, I think it's also a fine card to hold on to for now, since it will likely see another spike in demand when the new support officially comes out early next year. Okay, so this is a pretty random one. We have Evening Twilight Night. Now apparently this card is being used by branded Mitsurugi. To be honest, I didn't even know that that combination of strategies was a thing. Apparently this is something that people are actually trying out. Evening Twilight Night is support for the whole Blackluster Soldier Ritual deck, which was never really competitively viable at all. However, Evening Twilight Night has a very specific effect. When it's banished from the graveyard, you get to search for any ritual monster from your deck. Now, I'm not too sure about the exact lines, but the idea is that you use Branded Fusion and this series of fusion effects from Lubellion and Albion to get Twilight Night into the graveyard and then banish it, and in the process of setting up your Mirror Jade or your Albion, you get to search for Habakiri and do your whole Mitsurugi combo as well. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily good or bad since I've never actually seen the deck try to play, but this seems like a very specific line that's going to require you to run a ton of bricks in the deck, but then again, who knows, weirder things have topped before. Evening Twilight Night is actually a pretty old card that has very limited availability, coming out back in Dimension of Chaos and then being reprinted in the 2016 tins. Both printings were supers. Now this card was around $4 each for either copy before. We're now seeing those original print supers up at 8s and the reprints at 7s. Now, I don't know if Konami is actually going to reprint this card. It hasn't been reprinted in a really long time, so I guess it should, but it's also so obscure that maybe they just won't even bother giving it a reprint slot. But honestly, I don't really see branded Mitsurugi being too competitively viable unless someone that has like Triff levels of innovation is really onto something. So yeah, unless that's you, this is probably a card that you want to sell while it is seeing hype for the first time in its 10-year lifespan. Alright, so this here's a card that we talked about a month or two ago. It's Red Nova. So this is a card that's seeing hype because of the Killer Toon deck coming out in Phantom Revenge. Honestly, not that great of a theme with this first wave of support, but it does have potential if it gets some broken cards in an upcoming core set maybe. Anyways, Red Nova is a level 1 fire tuner, and if it's sent to the graveyard for a synchro summon that uses 2 or more tuners as material, you can special summon a Fire Fiend from your deck. So Killer Toon's whole thing is that they use all tuners for their synchro summons, and they can synchro summon using a tuner from hand. So with that, you use Red Nova from your hand as a material, and then you use its effect to bring out cool Toon Rico from your deck, which just happens to be an in-archetype Fire Fiend monster. So I think that going into Phantom Revenge reveals, some players were hopeful that maybe Red Nova would get a reprint in Phantom Revenge itself. However, that ultimately did not end up happening. When Red Nova was first hyped a few months ago as the Phantom Revenge stuff was first revealed, a lot of people bought into the hype of the card, especially since Red Nova has such limited availability. The secrets from Dragons of Legend 3 were up at $10 each, while the commons from the Dragons of Legend Complete Series set were at $6. However, with the hype dying down and the possibility of the card being reprinted in Phantom Revenge itself, we saw the secrets fall to about $5 and the commons fall to $2. Now that we have confirmation that Red Nova will not be included in Phantom Revenge, we've seen both versions of the card shoot up to their previous price point as players are wanting to grab the card in order to complete their Killer Toon decks, since it looks like it should at least be a very fun deck to play at your locals. Now, all of this doesn't mean that the card won't be reprinted eventually. This seems like the perfect card for Konami to include as a super rare or common in the next OTS tournament pack. However, I don't think that the deck is going to end up being relevant at all, at least not for several months until it gets some eventual new support. Keep a single copy of this card for yourself if you are interested in playing the Killer Toon deck, but you'll probably want to keep your extras in a trade binder for when the set drops, since people will be wanting to pick this card up in the very near future. And finally, we have one last card. It's Gravekeeper's Inscription. So this is a card that's been really on and off over the last couple of years, going through some formats where it seems really good and then others where it sort of sucks. This card is a bit annoying to use. It can only be activated at the start of your main phase 1, but you can either prevent both players from activating card effects in the graveyard, banishing cards from the graveyard, or special summoning monsters from the graveyard. So there are a couple of things that are worth noting here. The first and most obvious is that the card is actually really strong in the current format, since you can stop the 2 best decks in the game. Against Mitsuyami, they really struggle if they can't summon Mitsurugi ritual monsters back out of the graveyard, and they also can't tag their synchros out either. However, against Dracotail, you're either stopping them from bringing back Arthalion and Gulamel from the graveyard, hopefully setting you up to OTK them, or you're stopping them from triggering the effects of monsters that they fuse off during your turn, so completely cutting them off of their follow-up for the following turn. The other thing worth noting is that we have seen a surge in the play of all the Mulch armies recently, with Meowls and Perulia seeing more and more side deck play, so you're more likely to see this card in your opening hand when you are drawing so much more cards, rather than drawing into it later on in your turn and it being dead. Anyways, Gravekeeper's Inscription has just 2 printings. This was originally a secret rare in Photon Hypernova, and then it got a reprint in the 2024 tins. With this card, we were seeing either printing at $3 to $4 a few months ago, but we saw the card trend upwards and then actually start to see more play recently, so the card is now sitting at about $8 to $10 each. I do think that this is something that should be reprinted fairly soon, being a meta-relevant card. However, it's also not so absurdly expensive that you would feel obligated to sell it off if you owned it. I think it's perfectly reasonable to still hold on to a playset of this card, even if you're not necessarily using it. Maybe you're thinking of siding it in the near future, and then you can throw the other copies that you have into your trade binder, see if you can get a little bit more value out of them over the next couple of months. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's episode. Definitely excited to see what's happening at the Remote Duel YCS though. Obviously it's going to be a little bit sad because I don't think we get streams for the Remote Duel YCS. However, the results should definitely be interesting, and that's going to be the last big event of the year. Anyways guys, if you did enjoy today's episode, make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and until next time guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.